All right. Not really sure why I'm recording this today, since we're going to do a lot of this work on the board. But all right, so we don't really have anything new in terms of material today. So we've got those two sets of practice problems, which are going to be very good kind of study tools, or very reflective of the types of problems you could be asked in the exam. So I don't know if anyone has looked at those or has questions on those. If you did, I could start with those. Otherwise, I'll just kind of pick and choose. Yeah.
Well, this is, so you had, what is it? You had 15 on the second part.
Okay.
But you have no explanation as to what the answer is or anything.
Okay.
Yeah.
I will give you one then. I must have left. Oh, for 16?
No,
15?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So let's go through this. This is something that was pretty recent. So if I wanted to calculate concentration ratios or HHIs to kind of give me an idea about how concentrated this industry was, here I kind of told you there's five firms, right? So what I need to do is turn their amount of sales into the 15.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'll get there. I'll get there. Yeah. I'll get there.
Yeah.
So we've got every firm's sales, right? I need to figure out what their market share is, right? So if you think about kind of what we're doing with that 4-firm concentration ratio, we're kind of taking the market share of each of the top 4 firms and adding them up. We wanted to do that HHI. It was take every firm's market share, square it, and add them all up. Okay. So I don't have the market share. So what am I going to do? Well, I can find the total sales in this industry, and then turn each sales number into a market share. I would divide by the total sales, and we said multiply by 100, or move the decimal 2 places. So if I add these up, I get what? So 2 million, looks like 5 million. So then it's a matter of kind of turning these into market share. So for that first one, 200,000 divided by 5 million will be what? I believe it's a market share of 0.04. I think about here. I'm doing this off the top of my head, so if I get these numbers wrong, let me know. If I then look at the next one, 1 million divided by 5 million would be 0.2. Now, one thing I haven't done yet is I want the market share in terms of a percentage. So I'm finding these values, but the actual numbers I want to use in calculating that concentration ratio in the HHI is the percentage form. Well, how do I turn it kind of like a proportion or a decimal form into percentages? You just move the decimal 2 places, right? So here, this would be like 4%. Here it's 20%. And the next one, right? 1,500 divided by 5 million would be 0.3. 1.8 million divided by 5 million, 0.36 or 36%. And then the last one, 500,000 divided by 5 million should be 0.1 or 10%. Is it clear how I was coming up with these values? I know I was just kind of saying it verbally, right? You would just take each sale divided by the total sales in this industry, which if we add those up, did it in my head, but right in your calculator, 200,000 plus 1 million, so on and so forth, these will add up to 5 million. Questions? And I might be timed on the exam. I might give you what the market share percent is, but if you had a problem where you didn't, this is how you kind of determine what the market share percentage are. I'll get to 15 here. We're working there. So now that my market share percentage. Do I have any questions on that?
Is that 5 million or 3 million when they're all added up?
So 1,200, 2,700, 405 or 4,500,000 plus 5. Might have forgot some zeros. So like, these are millions, right? So we've got three that are over a million, so we know for sure it's gonna be about 3 million. Right? So you might be kind of missing some of the zeros when you're putting that in your 50. I couldn't talk to that. And then double check me, if those don't have 5 million money.
No, they do.
No. I'm looking at these half sideways and this always. So I've got my market shares, right? Should be pretty easy to find those 4 firm concentration ratios. It's just take the 4 largest market shares, add them all up. Now here I've only got 5 firms. So I could also say, well, I know if the 5th firm, the smallest firm, has 4%, the other 4 must have 96. Or I could just add these up in my calculator, I'll get the 96%. If I wanted that HHI, what do I need to do? I need to square each one of those market shares. So I'll look at that first firm, square their market share percent, square the seconds, square the thirds, fourths. Actually, sorry, not 10, right? Square all of those values and then add them up, right? So what's probably going to be advantageous for you to have Monday? A calculator, right? Had problems in the past. If you forget your calculator, there is no, you're gonna have to do the annoying thing where I come over if you want to use your phone. I won't have enough calculators to kind of give if we have more than one person. So I would not bank on that. So make sure you've got a calculator. I mean, I guess if you can do the math in your head, but like 36 squared is kind of a tough one, right? So I would, make sure you have a calculator that you're comfortable using, not on your phone going into the exam, okay? Questions on that one? That was, it's through 15, right? That was the HHI. We scroll down here. Yeah, yep. Questions, yeah.
On the homework, there was one that I was having a little trouble with.
Okay.
Question 14 on the homework 4, it was like talking about the price in comparison to your competitors. I just wanted to have a recap on that.
Okay, what was that?
And then what would you say in this from 15?
I did. I can't do this in my head. I'm like very sweaty.
Let's see.
27.
See?
Yeah.
Okay. 2,712. I mean, I might be able to do it in my head, but it'd probably take me an embarrassingly slow amount of time. So it was asking about the new market price relative to an old one after what? Something changed? I can pull it up too. I just might take me a little bit
It
longer.
was consider the following scenario on with projects or products. Assuming your competitor maintained the price, what would be your pricing response and how many units would you expect to sell at that same price? Is that going to be on the test?
Yeah, so I won't put one like that on there. I wanted to use that to kind of push this idea or give you exposure to the modeling of it. We kind of talked about this with oligopolies. In fact, I might have some, I think there's might be a problem here on this practice problem set that kind of matches up with this discussion. Let me see. This is single price monopolist. Okay, let's go back. I'm going to use this table. Okay. So, well, I'm going to come up with a table. So let's say that we have kind of this price quantity combination that represents our demand. So maybe this is something like 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Okay? And I don't know, let's do focus some interest. So 10,000, 8,000, 6,000, 4,000, 2,000, and then 0. This is my demand curve, right? This is for the entire market. So if I have a duopoly, let's say currently the price is $10. What would it be advantageous to do if we have the exact same goods? So I think that question probably says they have homogeneous products, right? The exact same good. So actually, can't do this here because I didn't differentiate that. Instead of 10, let's say it starts out in the middle, right, at $30. What would it be advantageous to do if I was one of these firms? Right now, if we're both charging 30, right, the total quantity on the market sold is 4,000. So assuming they have the same cost structure, like they're producing the same product, each firm, so we kind of think about this like the quantity of the firm would only be half that, right? We're kind of splitting, right? So what could it be advantageous to do if I was one of these firms? What happens if I have a lower price? As long as that price is still above my average total cost, right? That new price I'd lower it to. So let's say they choose 20, right? And if you want to here, we could like assume, I don't know, the difference between price and average total cost is 10 in each one of these, just to make it kind of easy. So one firm lowers their price, what's going to happen?
They get all the revenue.
They now get right, everyone wants to buy from them. Why am I going to buy this product for $30 from the other firm when I can get it for 20 from the other one, right? So the pricing response is always to kind of charge the next lower price. Now, the problem is if we had something like, let's assume the marginal costs in this industry are 10. And we have them constant. So that kind of makes it easy. You have constant marginal cost. You also have constant average total cost, right? Excuse me, in the long run. So in the long run, right, if marginal costs are 10, we know that they'll keep lowering their price lower and lower up into the point where both of them are charging that price that's exactly equal to whatever the marginal cost in that industry is. This was the idea that if we have these competitive firms in the long run for oligopolies or even a duopoly, right? If we have 3 or 4, do the same thing. The price will kind of fall to that marginal cost. As long as you got free entry and exit, you know, there's no regulation and government regulations, no barriers to entry. We'll kind of get this competition to where the price is driven down to the point where it's equal to marginal cost. Or what is that really saying? Well, the price is going to be the marginal revenue. So what we're really getting is price is equal to the marginal revenue, which is equal to marginal cost, which is what we say applies for every firm, right? Every firm maximizes profits where the marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. Does that kind of make a little more sense for those models? Yeah.
So for this example, the revenue created by each person in a duopoly at the price being 30 is 120,000, and one firm going down to 20 is also 120,000 for that one firm. So what would be the incentive to go down?
So before, if the price was 30, we're both charging 30.
Yeah.
We're not thinking about profit, we just want to think about revenue for right now.
Mhm.
30,000, or sorry, 30,000, 30 as the price, it's not times 4,000, because each firm is only getting 2, right? So they were actually only having what, 60,000 in revenue? What happens if they are the only one that lowers the price to 20? 20 times 6.
I did not know.
You understand that?
Yeah.
So now if we both lower our price to 20, well, yeah, now we're both worse off because now we're both only getting 3,000 units. Another question. Here's one more thing with these models that you might expect from that. So if we have kind of no agreements between the two firms, we'll always get this price to be down to exactly whatever marginal cost is, right? So no collusion. The long run equilibrium is that the price is equal to the marginal cost. And then at that point, so we'll think about the price would be 10 in our example, and the quantity for each firm. So I'll ask you a question maybe on the exam, about if we have a duopoly model, what's the quantity that the firm produces? Well, in the long run, this price will fall down to the marginal cost of 10, and the total quantity in the market is 8,000. We've got 2 firms, each firm would then be producing half of that. So our model where there's no collusion, we get the price being 10, And the quantity each firm produces is 4,000, making there 8,000 total in the market. Questions on that? Grab a different colored marker that we're gonna keep. So let's instead assume that these two firms can collude, right? So under collusion, right, where they're coordinating their actions, what are they gonna try to do? So if they're coordinating their actions, what are they gonna try to act like? Yeah, we said a monopolist, right? Because that's where the most surplus is extracted from consumers and converted to producers. So if my marginal cost is constant at 10, we know that a monopolist would choose to set the price where marginal revenue is exactly equal to that marginal cost. So I'd have to give you a setup that not only do you have the price and quantity combinations, but we also would have kind of total revenue, right? So you kind of think about here, well, yeah, so think about total revenue. So this is what? 0, 80,000. Hopefully that shows the numbers we have now. 120,000. 120,000. 80,000. Here. Now, I'm not gonna have one of those up. So let's choose a slightly different model. Let's say I've got. I need to change these numbers to show this too often. Let me. Let's say I'm not going to force you to do this, so this would be more realistic like what I would give you on these examples. These numbers aren't going to line up, but just for the sake of this example, let's say I not only give you this price quantity column, but I also give you a marginal revenue column, right? Or I give you a total revenue column where you can calculate marginal revenue from. So let's say here I've got, I know that marginal revenue is going to be declining kind of twice as steep as of prices. So maybe this is something like 0, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. This is kind of a tough one, right? But if I'm thinking about having this kind of constant marginal cost, right? I'm going to want to choose. Wait, that is no. No, that's right. So if I've got a marginal cost of 10, I don't have one of those numbers in this table. So I would, once again, I'll give you something. This isn't going to work out. I'll come up with this on the fly. I think this is actually what I want. So let's say I give you these marginal revenue values. Yeah, this is what I want. I then say, okay, these two duopolies or these two firms are acting like a monopoly, right? So they're going to try to find where does marginal revenue equal marginal cost. You kind of think about it when we had demand and marginal revenue is always less than the point that we'd be at on my demand curve. Okay. So if I gave you these marginal revenue values and said, where would the monopolists choose to maximize profits? Well, they're going to choose where marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost, right? Because they're not competing with anyone, right? A monopolist doesn't have to compete with anybody else. They don't have to worry that someone else is going to undercut their price. So I set marginal revenue equal to marginal cost. Marginal cost is 10. Marginal revenue is 10 at a quantity of 20. Sorry, quantity of 6,000, price of 20. Right? So this would be where the monopolist would choose. So if these two firms are able to collude and act like a monopolist, the new price, I can think about maybe with collusion, right, is going to be 20. And how much is each firm going to produce? Yeah. 3,000, which kind of lines up with the behavior of monopolists, right? We said monopolists should restrict quantity, so each firm is producing less, and the price should be higher, right? So if we don't have any collusion, these duopoly oligopoly, because of pricing competition, it gets driven down to basically like a fairly competitive outcome. But we know that if there's only a couple firms, they might be able to collude, coordinate their actions to act like a monopolist, produce a lower amount, they both produce a lower amount, they can then get away with, well, with lower supply, and get away with charging a higher price. And if we kind of worked out the revenues here, right, you kind of see here is what? 60,000 versus 40,000, so they both increase how much money they're bringing in by coordinating their action. So I would give you kind of this marginal revenue column, and then if you told they're colluding, you're basically trying to find, okay, where does the marginal revenue equal marginal cost? That would kind of be the new price and quantity that these two firms will collude to kind of have the result of the market be. So the price will be whatever it is, and each firm will produce half of the total quantity. So just gotta get it to do out there now. Questions on that? Sorry, it took me a second to think about the numbers there to make sure I gave something that would work out. Questions? Any other questions on the practice problem? Specifically, otherwise, like I said, I can pick and choose. So I think something that would be good to know. Oh, I know that there was. Here we go. Let's say we had something that looked like this. Right. So I've got a couple questions below this that we'll probably answer, right? So what's the profit maximizing quantity? What's the level of output? What's dead weight loss? What level of output would satisfy allocative efficiency? So we can answer all of these using this drawing or this graph, right? So, and I'll kind of add some things that I could ask as well. So here, if I've got a single price monopolist, he's choosing one price, he or she, I guess. What's the optimal or profit maximizing quantity? Yeah, right. Well, so here this one a little easy. There's really only two quantities to choose between, but the optimal quantity would be 15. What price could they get away with charging? Yeah, so how did you find that? So you found the quantity by looking at what point marginal revenue is equal to marginal cost. At that quantity, you then go up to your demand curve. When we think about it, if you're writing this out, to get your price. Right? So if I'm at that quantity of 15, I go up to my demand curve. I know people would be willing to pay their marginal benefit for $24. Okay. Any questions on that? Hopefully, that's an easy. I'll tell you right now, you're going to get a question. It's very similar to this on the exam. So hopefully that part is easy. But I think part of that problem not only asked you for the quantity, but it didn't want the price, it actually wanted the profits. Right? So this will be an equation I'll kind of write on the board at the beginning of the exam. Should be the only one that you can kind of need. I might write up a marginal cost equation as well. But it's really anything marginal is just a change in the total divided by a change in quantity. Right? So we've got this profit equation. All I need to do, I've got that quantity of 15, the price is 24. I only need to find out what my average total cost is at that quantity. Yeah.
Would it be 20? Because that's where it intersects.
Yep. So at this quantity, where are we at on the average total cost curve? 20. Right? So you look for what the value is at the average total cost curve at that optimal or at that profit maximizing quantity. So 20. So what? This is 60. So I get a profit of 60, optimal output is 15. Okay. Any questions over anything there up to this point? Skip a little bit. I'm going to skip the dead weight loss one for now. What if I wanted to know what's the price and quantity that would be what we call allocatively efficient in this market? Well, that definition of allocatively efficient was really just where would a perfectly competitive market get to? So all that term allocated efficient meant was where is total surplus maximized, or where would we be at if this is a perfectly competitive market? So if I'm looking at this here, what would that quantity be in a perfectly competitive market? Yeah, right. So why is it 25? Because this is a perfectly competitive market, then marginal cost represents supply. We know that it should just be that equilibrium point where supply is equal to demand. Right? And that was at a quantity of 25. Okay. What's the equilibrium price? Yeah, you go over that quantity of 25, and you can see that the price there is $18. So what was shown to a monopolist? Price was higher, 24 instead of 18. Quantity was lower. Questions on that? So maybe if you're trying to take this long. So the perfectly competitive outcome is what we would call allocated efficient. And here, actually, let me do something. I'm going to add something here. So let's do single price monopolist over here that we have. You can think about that was their profits. Okay. So because we have this monopolized market, what was the loss in surplus? Right? So we actually can calculate two things from this single price monopolist. I could ask you all three of these. More likely, I'm only going to ask you for this one and this one, but we'll kind of walk through the producer surplus as well. So if I want the dead weight loss, that's going to be the loss of surplus from underproduction by the monopolist. So the surplus loss is the area in between the marginal benefits and marginal costs, or in between my demand and my supply or my marginal cost. So I'm going to be thinking about trying to find the area of this triangle. So the height of that triangle is what? 24 minus 12, or 12, right? Multiplied by the base, which is what? 25 minus 15, right? The difference between those two quantities. It's the base of our triangle. And then times a half, right? So I've got what here? So 6 times 60, 10. Yep. Yeah, 60. So because I have this monopolized market, I'm losing the total surplus loss is $60. So a value of $60, right? And this, with these numbers put together. Right? Questions? How would I find consumer surplus from a monopoly? What area would that be up to?
30 and 24 and then 15.
Yeah, it's going to be this upper, right? We always said consumer surplus is on top, producer surplus is on the bottom. That's an easy way to kind of start thinking about it. And it's going to be the area above the price they pay, but below their marginal benefit or below the demand curve. So we've got that kind of top triangle there, which goes from 30 to 24. The base of that triangle, it's going from 0 to 15. Triangle, so we'll multiply it by half. So this is 45. I'm looking at this correctly. Questions on yeah.
I have one question. I don't know if it really matters all that much, but if this was a perfectly competitive market, they would be making negative profits, right?
Yeah, I'll get there in just a second. Once we get through this now. Yep.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. So it's good. I mean, you're thinking about this, right? So we've got, they started out, we know they have positive profits as a monopolist, right? So what's producer surplus? We're just going to look for the area below the price that they can charge and above the supplier, above their marginal cost, right? There's only one firm now, so it's going to be the supply and marginal cost curve are synonymous. So it's going to be the area above that marginal cost, but below the price that they can charge. So we're going to actually have to find two areas, right? We'll have this rectangle and then this little triangle down here. So, right, the rectangle is going to be 24 minus 12 times 15 minus 0. And then we'll add to that the area of that little triangle, which is 12 minus 4 times 15 minus 0 times a half, right? So that's going to be what? So we got 15 times 12. So 240. 240. Okay. So what would producer and consumer surplus be if we had a perfectly competitive market? Just this triangle here and this triangle here. Not going to waste time and treat those, but we could. what should be true if this was a market that was allocated efficient or competitive, what would happen to the value of consumer surplus? Go up. What would happen to producer surplus? Go down. What would happen to deadweight loss? It would go to zero, right? We were in an allocated efficient market. So there's two more things I want to use this graph for. So the first is kind of related to your question. Because if this is a perfectly competitive market, we would end up with a scenario where price, I don't have the value, but I can see it's below my average total cost, which would mean that this one firm would have negative profits, right? So we think about like another firm trying to enter this market, kind of competing with this other firm, driving that price down to, you know, that equilibrium point, that allocated efficient point. Once that second firm would join and, you know, cause that monopoly power to go away, well, now both firms have negative profits. What's going to happen? One of them is going to leave. So this is an example of we call this a natural monopoly. There's only enough demand given the cost structure, unless costs change over time, the demand can only support one firm, right? So if I'm the government, right, how would I regulate this monopolist? I can't force them to charge that $18, you know, allocated to the efficient price, because if I do, I drive them out. I drive them out of the industry, deadweight losses, that entire area, right? Nothing sold. So, what point would they actually want to set the price if they can estimate?
Over the 20. What it looks like.
So, actually, we can be a little bit better. Now, I can't get the exact number from this drawing, but we can kind of think about conceptually if I've given you a couple more points here. Let's say I do set the price at 20. Right? So I set this price at 20. This many units are going to be sold. You can see that at 20, I'd still have some positive profits, right? And I still would have kind of some of this deadweight loss down here. I can actually reduce a little bit more by lowering the price to 19. Now I've only got even smaller amount of deadweight loss.
The average total cost is the mean.
I take it to that point where that average total cost curve hits my demand. Because if I set the price here, price is exactly equal to average total cost, the monopolist is indifferent between staying or leaving that industry. You know, in practice, maybe I want to keep like a little bit above it to have a buffer, but that's the last kind of price I can set to keep that monopolist in the industry. And I haven't completely reduced deadweight loss, like you can imagine, a little trial here, but I have minimized it. Can't completely eliminate it, but I can minimize it. So we want to set, how would we regulate a natural monopoly? Once again, I might be going through this, they wrote these in, so I might know that's good to know. You would want to choose that point where the average total cost is kind of hitting your demand curve. So if you're taking this, you know, a natural monopoly regulation, right? You want the price where average total cost hits that demand curve. Questions on that? Something else I want. Oh, so let's say that instead, let's say instead I've got not a single price monopolist, but I've got a price discriminating monopolist, right? Who's able to perfectly price discriminate. This was the idea of, you know, Fanatics or Amazon having all this ability to like look at your past history and then kind of target different prices, right? So if I have a perfectly price discriminating monopolist, so we'll call this, instead of single price, we'll call this ED, so price discriminating monopolist. What would, just kind of shorthand there, I guess if you want to write the words out, that's fine, I'm just shorthanding it. What would the price quantity combination be for a perfectly price discriminating monopolist? It's kind of, so when they're perfectly price discriminating, what does the marginal revenue curve become? I can charge every single consumer exactly how much they benefit, right? So I can raise my marginal revenue curve now becomes that demand curve. Now, this is an example where it wouldn't make a lot of sense because we have kind of this natural monopoly. If I gave you an example like this on the exam. Let's see, can I move this average total cost curve? I would have an average total cost curve down here to kind of show that there, there'll be positive profits. But if my marginal revenue curve, when I'm price discriminating becomes my demand curve, where's the optimal quantity? Well, this is my marginal revenue curve.
It's still between.
Marginal revenue is marginal cost at that allocated efficient point. So we said these perfectly price discriminating monopolists will increase quantity, right? In fact, if they're perfectly price discriminating, they'll increase up the allocated efficient point. And the price, well, won't be one price, we can't actually say, because they're going to charge every single different consumer whatever their marginal benefit is. So the price will vary by consumer, but we'll get to this allocated efficient quantity. Dead weight loss will be what? We're at the allocated efficient quantity. Total surplus is maximized. Well, total surplus is maximized. But what would consumer surplus be? Everybody's being charged exactly how much they benefit. The difference between the demand curve and the price, well, they're now the exact same thing. Yeah, total surplus is maximized, but consumer surplus is minimized, right? It's down to zero. And then how would I find producer surplus? Well, it's the difference between the price they charge, which is just basically the demand curve now, and their marginal cost. It would just be that entire triangle, right? So we did that here, what? 30 to 4 would be the height. 25 to 0. And then times 1/2. Okay. So I may not, I may ask you like on the exam, if this was a perfectly price discriminating monopolist, I might want you to know things like the equilibrium quantity will be the allocated efficient quantity. I might want you to know that total surplus is maximized, right? Because we're at that allocated efficient quantity. I might also want you to know that consumer surplus, however, goes to 0. Right? And if I'm comparing my producer surplus when they were a single price monopolist, it should be that producer surplus, if they price discriminate, should be higher. This value is up the top of my head here, but if you compute it, it should be higher than what we found before. Does that make sense? Kind of the expectation there of what I could ask. So we solve these monopoly models very similar to how we do a monopolistic competitive models, right? In fact, when we draw them out, they really look no different. Right? Now, there was going to be one difference when we're thinking about monopolistic competitive models, which is that these firms do face kind of this downward sloping marginal revenue curve. However, let's say we had a scenario like this where there were positive profits. What's going to happen if this was instead of a monopoly model, a monopolistically competitive model? So if there's positive profits, firms can enter. Right? We said monopolistic competitive and perfectly competitive market, free exit and entry. So if there's positive profits, firms will enter. Okay? If firms enter this market, how does it kind of change things in a monopolistic competitive model? What's going to shift? We're not all charging the same price. So when we had a perfectly competitive market, we'll kind of draw that out first. So let's say I've kind of got my perfectly competitive market, I've got my marginal cost, the price, equilibrium price is my marginal revenue, and I don't know, let's say here's my average total cost curve, right? Well, this doesn't quite line up on, let me see. I need to shift my supply curve a little bit. So this was the equilibrium price of the good, and that was like the market, right? Supply, market demand. So they take that price as given, right? That just becomes, that's how, if it's in a perfectly competitive market, they have to sell that good, that homogeneous good, same as everybody else. So the price becomes their marginal revenue curve.
Does their quantity increase because there's another firm joining?
So I'll come back to it in 1 second. But if we think about where's the profit maximizing point here, once again, every firm, where does marginal cost equal marginal revenue? Okay, we've got positive profits. So firms will enter the market. What happens to my market supply and demand curve? Firms enter. Well, market supply is just adding up each company's individual supply curve. If I now have the same companies I did before plus more, right, new ones, I'm gonna get this increase in supply. What does that increase in supply do? Drives that price down. Now, my marginal revenue curve, so if I don't have colors here, we call this 2. You're taking notes. Now, the profit maximizing quantity would be down here, right? Because there's a lower price, we'll then kind of see the quantity that the firm sells falls. Now, what would have to be true? So here, now what has happened to profits?
You're negative.
Yeah, my price is slightly below where I'm at on my average total cost curve. So if profits are negative, I would have one more thing to consider. This would have to be in the short run, because in the long run, profits should get driven down to 0, right? We're gonna have this entering and exiting. They'll kind of keep going back and forth right until we get down to that point where profits are 0. But if this was the short run, this firm may still operate as long as what? What did we compare?
It has something to do with marginal cost and marginal revenue, right? As long as they're.
So they'll still choose that same quantity where marginal cost is equal to marginal revenue. We said the shutdown of the firm comes down to as long as the price, well, we know that it's going to be below average total cost, right? But if it's above average variable costs, we said they were still going to minimize losses. That their losses would be less from continuing to operate than completely shutting down. So we kind of have this average variable cost curve. If the price was still above our average variable, we continue to operate in the short run and hope that other firms exit, driving the price up, you know, and then eventually being kind of one of those firms that are left. Yeah.
Kind of like a life question.
Mhm.
An example of like Amazon where they can force their prices so low that their aim is just to get competitors out of their market space.
Yeah.
What is that called? What is that situation called where it's so low, like they're losing money, but like.
So what they did was basically drive down their average total cost so that their cost structure looked different than every other firm. So if we have, under these models, we're assuming that the firms have the same cost structure, that all the resources are available to every firm. But if Amazon monopolizes the resources that are available to them, the distribution network, but they don't let anybody else use their distribution. If everybody else could just, you know, let's say Amazon, all their warehouses, all their centers, you could just contract out to different companies. Well, every single company's average total cost curve would decrease, right? But given what their resources are, their distribution costs are much higher. So they drove this average total cost curve down, right? So that even at low prices, their average total cost curve is down here, Amazon can make positive profits. Every other firm who wants to enter that market, they don't have that distribution network. If they wanted to kind of provide that same network, the costs are astronomically high. The average total cost for them would be way above that price. So now it took a lot of foresight for him to see that, like, look, it's going to take, I mean, I don't know if you know the origin story. When I was in college, like, it was just books on Amazon. That's all they sold. But they used that product to start building this distribution network. So the real value is the distribution network lowering your costs now for providing any product. There's not necessarily a name for it, but that's what they were doing. Yeah. Good question. And I'm excited after this exam. I think the last third of the class will dive is pretty interesting topics, and I think harder even than But I wanted to point out one thing before we get out of here, right? So we've got these monopolistically competitive markets. This would be important to leave, right? So we said the firm will choose this equilibrium quantity where marginal cost is the marginal revenue. And that they'll set the price kind of similar to monopolies, right? Go up to the demand. So let's just say, I don't know, we've got positive profits here, we're above the average full cost. Similar to perfectly competitive markets, what's gonna happen? Firms are going to enter the market. It works a little bit differently though. So with a monopolistic competitive market, we're not all feeding off the same demand curve, right? We've differentiated our product, whether that's that through advertising, branding, actually creating a slightly different product, right? So we don't face the same demand curve, so we're not kind of beholden to that market supply, market demand, because we're technically kind of all in like different markets that are related to that. So we said the way that it operates here is if more firms enter, so let's think about, we're just thinking about branding, and we've got differences in, pop, right? Well, what if another firm enters that market? Well, overall demand for pop is the same, it's just that maybe that new firm can steal part of the demand that other firms had before. So it's almost like we see a reduction in the demand curve that they face once these firms enter. As that happens, where's the new equilibrium quantity? Maybe it's down here. Right, this is an example I kind of show. Well, now profits would be negative, right? So then maybe some firms will exit. As they exit, demand kind of goes back to, wherever those firms exit, their demand kind of goes to the other differentiated products, or the other soda or the other offerings. We're gonna get that driven back up. Just like the perfect competitive market, though, that entry and exit of firms will result in zero profits in the long run. So, before I let you go, a couple things kind of about the exam. So it's going to be, I think I have exactly 26 questions. Now, a lot of these questions are related to each other, so it's like some of your work on one problem will kind of apply to the next one. And then I'll have 4 questions at the end, which are just true false. They're meant to be a little bit easier, and what I think will maybe help kind of boost grades in. So they're not worth quite as much as the multiple choice. I think it's 3.5 and true false or 3. I would not expect to have the same opportunity as you did after the first exam to make corrections. So that is likely not something that's going to occur. So going into this, do not plan on that because it's not going to happen. Right? So really, just want to clarify this. I'll be in my office today from 2 to 4. If you have any questions, if you have been looking at kind of those practice problem sets, I would kind of go back through the slides too, and anywhere where I had kind of eye clickers, or even if you didn't use it for eye clicker, it looks like a button that you could use. Make sure you can kind of answer those or reproduce the answers that you see. I think I'll make sure this each slide or the complete versions are up, but every other version or the complete version should be up there on Canvas. If you have any other questions as we study, feel free to shoot me an email. I'll kind of periodically try to put an email as much as possible over the weekend, and then I will see you guys in class here on Monday. Okay. All right. Fun, safe weekend. I'll see you on Monday. You too.